Hello everyone, I'm True Scares. Today I'll share a story that might just keep you on the edge of your seat. This is a tale of isolation, fear, and survival. I will read a story that maybe one of you has experienced. So before we begin, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're from and what time you're watching. Lay back comfortably, relax, and let's begin. Story first, by Olivia H. The year was 2018. I had just moved to New York City, excited to start fresh after a tough breakup. My name is Olivia. I was 26, working as a freelance graphic designer. I found a small studio apartment on the 4th floor of an old brick building in Queens. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The neighborhood was bustling during the day. Food vendors on every corner, children playing in the park. But at night, it transformed. The streets became eerily quiet, with only the occasional hum of distant traffic. My building was no different. The creaking floors and thin walls amplified every sound, making the nights feel much lonelier than they were. I kept telling myself that this was part of the charm of city living. But looking back, I should have trusted the unease that settled in my chest every time I walked through the dimly lit hallway to my apartment. One Thursday night, after finishing a late project, I locked my door and crawled into bed. The glow of my laptop filled the room as I played my favorite playlist to drown out the silence. As my eyes began to close, I heard it, soft, deliberate footsteps in the hallway. At first, I ignored it. People came and went all the time. But these steps stopped, right outside my door. I froze. My apartment didn't have a peephole, just a tiny gap at the bottom of the door. I leaned over quietly, pressing my ear to the cold wood. Knock. Knock. It was soft, hesitant. My heart raced. Who would visit this late? I checked my phone. No missed calls or texts. Slowly, I slid out of bed and approached the door. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound confident. No answer. I stood there, waiting. After what felt like an eternity, I heard retreating footsteps fading down the hall. I peeked out of the gap under the door, but I saw nothing. The next morning, I convinced myself it was a harmless mistake, someone looking for the wrong apartment. But the unease lingered. 2 days later, it happened again. This time, a small piece of paper was slipped under my door. "I see you." The words were written in a shaky hand, the ink smudged as if the writer was in a rush. My stomach turned. I called the building manager, Mr. Peterson, and explained everything. He was a kind but overworked man in his 50s. "Miss Olivia, I'll check the CCTV, he assured me. "But these things happen. It's probably kids playing pranks." The next day he called me back. "I'm sorry," he said. "The camera's in your hallway. They've been out for months." That night, I triple-locked my door and barricaded it with a chair. I sat on the couch, clutching my phone, unable to focus on anything but the growing sense of dread. Around midnight, the power went out. The entire building was plunged into darkness. I grabbed my phone, turning on the flashlight. That's when I heard it again, the footsteps. They were slow, heavy, and coming closer. My flashlight illuminated the crack under the door, and I saw a shadow. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. No answer. Suddenly the doorknob jiggled. The sound echoed in the silence, each rattle sending a shock through my body. I didn't think. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife I could find. The jiggling stopped, but I knew whoever it was hadn't left. The silence was deafening. Then I heard it. A soft, raspy breath. And then It happened. The door burst open. A man wearing a grotesque mask stood there, his eyes wild and frantic. I screamed, slashing wildly with the knife. He stumbled back, tripping over the chair I had barricaded. But he didn't stay down. Before he could get up, I bolted for the hallway, banging on my neighbor's door. Mrs. Callahan, an elderly woman, opened it just as the man fled down the stairs. The police arrived minutes later. They found the man's backpack outside the building. Inside were photos of me, taken through my window while I was asleep. That night I packed my belongings and stayed with a friend. I moved out the next week, leaving the memories of that apartment behind. But to this day, I still check every door and every window twice before going to bed. Because sometimes the shadows outside aren't just shadows. Sometimes they're watching you. Story second by Ethan R. In 2019, Ethan, a 28-year-old software developer, moved into a modern apartment complex in downtown Chicago. It was a sleek high-rise, boasting security features like keycard access, 24/7 surveillance, and a concierge service. Ethan thought he had found the perfect place to start fresh after a messy divorce. His apartment on the 10th floor was spacious yet minimalist. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided a breathtaking view of the city skyline, especially at night when the buildings lit up like stars. It was everything he wanted, a sanctuary in the bustling city. But from the first week, Ethan noticed something strange. It started small. He would hear faint footsteps in the hallway late at night, long after the concierge desk closed. Once, he swore he heard knocking at his door around 3 a.m., but when he checked the peephole, no one was there. He brushed it off, blaming his overactive imagination or the thin walls of the building. But then one morning he found a muddy footprint outside his apartment door. Confused, he checked with the concierge, who assured him no one had reported anything unusual. Still, Ethan's unease grew. 2 weeks later, Ethan worked late and returned home just past midnight. As he stepped off the elevator onto his floor, he noticed something peculiar. The motion-activated hallway lights weren't turning on. The hallway was dark, save for the faint glow from the emergency exit sign. He used his phone's flashlight to navigate, but as he approached his door, he froze. There, just a few feet ahead, was the outline of a person. "Hello?" Ethan called out, his voice trembling slightly. The figure didn't move. It was just standing there, silent. Ethan's heart raced as he hurriedly unlocked his door and slipped inside. He double-locked it and pressed his ear to the door. The hallway was silent. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. His mind replayed the shadowy figure over and over. By morning, he convinced himself it had been a trick of the light, but the feeling of being watched persisted. A few days later, while reviewing footage from his home security camera, a small device he had installed in his living room, he noticed something chilling. At 3:17 a.m., the camera captured his apartment door creaking open slightly before quickly closing. He was sure he had locked the door before bed. Ethan reported the incident to building management. They checked the keycard logs but found no record of anyone accessing his floor at that time. The building's CCTV footage didn't show anything unusual either. That same night, Ethan woke to a faint creaking sound. It was coming from his closet. With his heart pounding, he grabbed a kitchen knife and slowly approached. When he yanked the door open, it was empty, except for a crumpled piece of paper on the floor. It read, "You're not alone." Terrified, Ethan decided to stay with a friend. As he packed a bag, he noticed something even more disturbing. His laptop, which he always kept closed, was open. On the screen was a single sentence typed repeatedly, "I'm watching you." Panicked, he left the apartment that night. He called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was no sign of forced entry, and the strange messages were gone. Days later, Ethan learned the truth. A maintenance worker had been using a master key to access various apartments, including his. The man had set up hidden cameras and was watching tenants while they slept. Ethan's case led to the man's arrest, but the damage was done. The sense of safety Ethan once had in his own home was gone forever. Ethan moved out shortly after, choosing an older building with less technology, but more transparency. To this day, he keeps his blinds drawn and triple checks his locks every night. Because in the city you never truly know who's watching. Story third, by Claire M. In 2020, Claire, a 32-year-old aspiring writer, moved into a quiet apartment building on the outskirts of Dublin, Ireland. She wanted peace, a place where she could focus on her first novel without distractions. The building was old but charming. Each floor had 2 apartments, separated by thick walls that muffled noise. Claire was thrilled with the solitude, especially compared to her previous place, which had been noisy and crowded. Her unit on the top floor was small but cozy. The large bay window overlooked a quiet street, and her writing desk fit perfectly against it. Claire couldn't have asked for more, but she quickly realized the silence wasn't as comforting as she had imagined. On her first night, Claire noticed something peculiar. As she lay in bed, she heard faint sounds coming from the apartment next door. It was the soft hum of a woman's voice, almost like singing. She found it odd because the building manager had told her the unit next door was vacant. Shrugging it off as her imagination, she fell asleep. The next morning, curiosity got the better of her. She asked Mr. Hennigan, the elderly building manager, about it. "The unit next door hasn't been rented for years," he said, his brow furrowing. "You must have been hearing things." Claire dove into her writing. The apartment seemed perfect during the day, calm, sunny, and inspiring. She often lost track of time, writing until dusk. But at night, the strange sounds returned. Footsteps echoed faintly, stopping near her shared wall. And then, the singing. This time it was louder, clearer. A soft, haunting melody that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She placed her ear against the wall, hoping to catch more. But the moment she did, the singing stopped. A week later, while rearranging her bookshelf, Claire noticed something wedged in the gap between the shelves and the wall. It was an old, leather-bound diary, covered in dust. The diary belonged to a woman named Margaret, who had lived in the apartment next door in the 1950s. As Claire read, she discovered Margaret had been a pianist, known for composing beautiful but melancholic music. But the entries turned darker. Margaret wrote about hearing strange noises in her apartment, knocks on her walls, and footsteps in the hall when no one was there. She became convinced the building was haunted. The final entry sent chills down Claire's spine. "They won't stop singing. They're in the walls." That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She stared at the bay window, her mind racing. Suddenly, she noticed a shadow move across the glass. It wasn't a car or a passerby. It moved deliberately, like someone pacing outside her window on the fire escape. Gathering her courage, Claire grabbed a flashlight and peeked outside. The fire escape was empty. But as she turned back, she saw it. A handprint on the glass. A fresh one. The next few nights were worse. The singing became louder, almost mournful. Claire started hearing whispers, faint but unmistakable, coming from the vents. Desperate for answers, she contacted the building manager again. "This building has its quirks," Mr. Hennigan said, avoiding her gaze. "Old pipes, creaky floors, nothing to worry about." But Claire saw the unease in his expression. He wasn't telling her everything. One night, Claire decided she'd had enough. She knocked on the door of the supposedly vacant apartment. No answer. She tried the handle, and to her surprise, it was unlocked. The apartment was cold, almost freezing. Dust covered every surface, and the air smelled of mildew. In the center of the room stood a grand piano, its lid slightly open. As Claire approached, she saw sheet music scattered across the floor. One piece caught her eye: the silent apartment. Suddenly, the piano keys pressed down on their own, playing the haunting melody she'd heard through the walls. Claire fled, her heart pounding. She locked herself in her apartment and called the police. When they arrived, they found no evidence of anyone in the neighboring unit. The piano was covered, its keys untouched. The next day, Claire packed her belongings and left. She couldn't explain what she had experienced, but she knew one thing: some silences are better left undisturbed.